Romans, Germans, barbarians, oh my. Netflix brings a new German series that takes a look at Germanic tribes and how they stood up to Roman aggression. Barbarians is streaming now. Should you be binging? It's 9 AD, and Rome is continuing to increase its empire. It sends in legions of Roman soldiers to try and subdue some Germanic tribes. And as can be expected, that doesn't go over too well. Germany has a really good track record of bringing good original content to Netflix. And in this, it's a historical drama. And when I say historical, I mean that it takes place in the past. I have zero idea on its accuracy, and nor do I really care, because this isn't a documentary. This is truly an action and a drama. We have all of these tribes who don't really get along. They function independently, and they each even have their own type of king. But Rome gets greedy, and they want to change the terms of their peace, and that's when the conflict really begins. We have a few main characters that are a lot of fun to watch because they have a lot of charisma, but then they also bring a lot of strength and conflict to the story. Fulquin is hot-headed and he's passionate, but he's also honorable and fierce. And he doesn't always think everything through, which can add some frustration, but also a little bit of comedy to the series, just as we watch him go through his actions. And, you know, when you are so passionate about something and you don't necessarily put all of the dots together and think 12 steps ahead, well, calamity might happen every now and then. And when I say there's comedy, it's not played up as a comedic type of thing. It just provides a little bit of a chuckle. And it's certainly more circumstantial than anything. Tusnelda is strong-willed and a natural-born leader. She stands when others don't, and I love how she inspires so many people around her. Arminius is a Roman prefect, and he functions differently than a lot of his other Roman counterparts. He's much more diplomatic, and he really works to coerce the barbarians with his words, and with logic and with reason, rather than just violence. But he can get violent sometimes. This 6-episode first season does a really good job of building out the characters and the story. I mean, those that need the development and they need all of the backstory and just the depth to them, we get that with them. Sometimes we get it in chunks and then it's built up over time throughout the series, which I enjoy because we're not just given everything and then trying to remember it, or it feels out of place, where it doesn't in this. When it's appropriate that we learn a chunk of information about somebody, we're given it at that appropriate time. And so it's not just all haphazardly thrown together. But there was a character who is shown, and I thought that this person was going to be kind of central to at least some motivations or to some influence. And they're shown through flashbacks, and then never again. There's no mention, there's no resolution to them, nothing. And it almost, they should have just been cut out, because even though they were there in the flashbacks, because there was no present day application for that, no influence, no story arc, not even a reference, it makes no sense to add this character in. Now, maybe in subsequent seasons, they're going to do that, but for this, it's kind of pointless. I enjoy how the story builds too, because it appears to take place over several weeks or maybe a couple of months. It's not a long period of time, because there are certain key factors that we see that give us kind of a reference of time. And what that does, what all this is going on in relatively a short period of time, it adds an urgency and it adds a tension to the entire story. The setting is beautiful and it's daunting. I mean, you have this forest that is deep and dark at places. There are swamps and bogs and just cliffs. And it's not some place that you want to go at night alone, because it would just be pitch black. But that's what I love too, is that the barbarians, this is their home. So this is really their fortress. You have the sheer numbers of Roman soldiers that come in, and that is just overwhelming. But if they have to go into a forest, that levels the playing field just a little bit, because now the numbers don't necessarily matter nearly as much as the ability to traverse all the different terrains. The theme of family and loyalty is huge throughout this entire season. And not only does that help to set up some conflict, but it also adds some drama and treachery to different parts of the story. One thing that I really appreciated is that we get to see both perspectives of the story. We get to see it from the Germanic tribes, which have been called the barbarians, but we also get to see the Roman aspect of it too, as they go about planning and just their inner workings and how they feel that things should be carried out, and then their reactions when the Germanic tribes don't necessarily agree with all of that. I just love how then you have each side believing that their rationales are just and are correct. And then the conflict that builds and that brings, and that's what makes this an exciting story. Each episode is only about 45 minutes, and with only 6 episodes, it does scoot right along. There were a few times where the screen faded to black and then came back for some small time jumps, and that, I'm not really a fan of that necessarily, but I also didn't feel cheated out of the content that was going on. I mean, it just helped to move things along a little bit, because I think what was going on in maybe the day or the week that was in the blackness didn't really matter. At first, I thought this was going to be a limited series. I mean, we're telling a point in time of history where the Romans and the barbarians are coming to a head for a battle. And that's what I thought. Okay, great. We're leading up to this. We're going to show that battle. The outcome is the outcome, and then we move on. But as the last episode finished, it left it open for subsequent seasons. And I'm a little bummed by this, honestly, because now we can see how the show is shaping up to go away from this historical conflict type of thing to now into more of that soap opera-ish drama. And while that in and of itself is not a bad thing, it's just not what I expected when I watched the series. It didn't feel like that's where it was going to lead to. I feel that way, especially because the story itself felt like it had a conclusion, like we had ended, and they could have ended it right there, but they chose not to, and so now we'll just have to wait and see where it goes. Because this involves the barbarians and the Roman soldiers, there's a fair amount of fighting that takes place. They don't shy away from the blood or the violence, and the way that it's shot and the way that it's all framed and choreographed makes it very exciting and tense. Now, there are portions of this that feel a lot like Braveheart, and that's pretty unavoidable, I would think, just because that movie is so iconic, but then you also have a ruling elite who feels that they can subdue the savages. And that's what's going on here as well. And we even get a point where some of the characters look like a cross between they came out of Braveheart and Lord of the Rings, and they were the orcs. And just because some of the paint that's on the faces and on the bodies, and doesn't make it bad by any means, I enjoyed that design. And speaking of like costume design, normally I don't really focus on that unless it's terrible or it's really good. And there was a point in time in this that made me chuckle because a few of the characters full on looked like they were wearing flannel pajama pants. Stood out to me as odd, made me laugh, but didn't draw me enough out of the narrative where it really bothered me. It was just more of like, oh, that's really weird. And then when you see it on one character, no big deal. But then when I saw it on 3 or 4, it was just like, oh, that was an odd choice. Oh well, whatever. Overall, this is a good watch and a relatively short one. The characters are fun, the drama and deceit, the treachery and the conflict, all of that helps to build a really engaging story. And then you combine that with a bunch of bloody action, and it becomes pretty entertaining. Even though I would have preferred for this to have been a limited series rather than them continuing on, I'm still going to check out subsequent seasons. I want to see where it's going to go because I had a lot of fun with this one. There is sex, nudity, some profanity, and a ton of bloody violence. I give Barbarians 4 out of 5 couches. What have you been watching lately on Netflix? Anything good that you can recommend to me in the comments below? If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.